Today we're going to look at two different clauses that take the subjunctive. So we're going to begin moving into uses of the subjunctive in dependent or subordinate clauses, which is the primary job that the subjunctive does. And today our clauses are the purpose clause and the result clause, which have some similarities, so it makes sense to learn them together. The first thing we have to learn, though, is something called sequence of tenses. And this is something that is certainly necessary if we compose in Latin, but it's also really important. It helps us identify what's going on in a Latin sentence if we know this rule. And this rule is really consistent, and it applies to almost every clause that takes the subjunctive. So we've said before that most subjunctives appear in what are called dependent or subordinate clauses, and we have four tenses of the subjunctive, so you might be thinking, how in the world do I know what tense to use or what tense an author is going to use? Is it just random? And the answer is no, it's not random. What we use is something called the sequence of tenses. So here's what typically happens. In the sequence of tenses, if the main verb, the verb in our main sentence, is in the present, the future perfect, or if it's in the perfect and the perfect means have done something, then this is something that we call primary sequence. And if your verb is in primary, then you only have two options. You're either going to use a present subjunctive, and the present subjunctive is going to show something that's happening at the same time or is going to happen after the action of the main verb. And if the action in the dependent clause has happened before that, then we use the perfect to show prior time. And those are if your main verb is one of these tenses, then your only options are the present or the perfect subjunctive. You're never going to see the imperfect or the pluperfect subjunctive. Likewise, if your main verb is imperfect, perfect, where we translate it like a simple past, did instead of has done, right? Or a pluperfect, this is what we call secondary sequence. And in those situations, we are going to use the imperfect subjunctive, which shows same time as, or we'll use the pluperfect subjunctive to show time prior. And if you think about it, this makes sense. The imperfect is a past tense that happens over a long period of time. It's built from the present stem. So if we're in the past and we want to talk about something that was also happening in the past in our subordinate clause, we use the imperfect subjunctive. That's what it shows. If we want to talk about something that happened before that, we use the pluperfect. For all of the clauses that we're going to talk about today, all of them only have same time, future time. Okay? So the only tenses of the subjunctive we'll be working with are present subjunctive and imperfect subjunctive. And I think you'll see why when we talk about what these clauses are. It just wouldn't make sense to have perfect or pluperfect subjunctive. First, we'll talk about purpose clauses. So the point of a purpose clause is to show the aim or the purpose of an action in the main verb, right? I am writing a novel in order to become famous. So that's my goal, and that expresses why the purpose of my writing a novel. In Latin, these kinds of clauses are expressed by ut if we want to show something that you're trying to do positively, or if it's negative, we use ne. And these clauses follow sequence of tenses. That is, if your main verb is a primary tense verb, present, future perfect, or a perfect where we translate it have, then the verb in the purpose clause is going to be in the present subjunctive. And if our main verb is a past tense verb, perfect, where it means was, imperfect, or pluperfect, then we're going to use the imperfect subjunctive. So it's really super easy, either present subjunctive or imperfect subjunctive. Purpose clauses get translated usually as in order to, or so that. And in English, sometimes we just say to, as you'll see. Okay. But if we look at these examples that I have here for you, Romam venio ut reginam videam. So here's our main verb, right? I come to Rome in order to see the queen, right? If you want to use so that is helpful because then we can use our person and number. It makes it a little easier, right? I come to Rome so that I may see the queen. I come to Rome to see the queen, right? So all of those are possible translations for a purpose clause, and you can see all of them are really trying to show why I'm going to Rome. We can also put it in the past tense. Romam veni ut reginam viderem. Here you can see we're using the imperfect subjunctive because we're in secondary sequence. We have a verb in the perfect. I came to Rome to see the queen. I came to Rome in order to see the queen. I came to Rome so that I might see the queen. Okay, so here present subjunctive, and here imperfect subjunctive. If you want to do a negative clause, I've sort of changed slightly that clause that we had from our poem the other day, but you can see here, Bastia conturbabimus ne malus nos invideat. We will mix up the kisses so that a bad man may not envy us. Okay. When you have a different person and number, it's a little harder, but you could say we will mix up our kisses in order that a bad man not envy us. We will mix up our kisses so that a bad man may not envy us, right? All of those are possible translations. And we can put it into the past tense. Basia conturbavimus ne malus nos invideret. Imperfect subjunctive. Right? We mixed up our kisses in order that a bad man couldn't envy us. We mixed up our kisses so that a bad man might not envy us. We mixed up our kisses so that, and I guess that's about it. So, but you can see here, I think, that these are all possible translations for our purpose clauses. You can see that they consistently use ut or ne if we're talking about a positive or a negative purpose. You can see that they use the present and the imperfect subjunctive really consistently depending on what the main verb in the clause is. In terms of result clauses work the same way in terms of the tenses of the subjunctive that they include. If we're talking about something that is going to be the result of a particular action, that result is going to come after the action of the main verb, not before. And so that's why we're only ever going to use the present subjunctive or the imperfect subjunctive. Result clauses show the consequences of an action in the main clause. They show the result. And result clauses are also introduced by this word ut, which is why we teach them together with purpose clauses, because sometimes they can be slightly confusing. Are we looking at a purpose or a result? In the negative, though, it's super clear because instead we use ut non, or we use some other negative word like nemo or nullus or something like that. Often in result clauses, we also have in the main part of the sentence, in the main clause, we will have a word that means so. So this could be something like tam, ita, seek, adeo. All of these words mean so or thus. Or it could be a word that has so sort of embedded in it. Tantus, so great. Talis, of such a sort. Tot, so many. Totien, so often. One of these words, whether it begins with a T, if this occurs in the main part of your sentence, or one of these other words, tam, seek, ita, adeo, you may well be looking at a result clause. It's a good tip-off. And of course, as I said, these clauses follow the sequence of tenses. And they're often, if you think about those kinds of jokes that start off, like yo mama jokes, or jokes that start off with like, my wife is so whatever, that comedians used to tell in the Catskills all the time. Those are the kinds of clauses, those are result clauses, right? So if you said something like, my dog is so silly that, right? We have this so that. Those are indicating that you have a result clause coming up. So it's really, really super clear usually. So here are a couple of examples, right? We have something like pugno tam fortiter ut proelium vincam. Okay, so you can see that I've got this tam right here, and I've got an ut, and then I have a verb in the present subjunctive. My main verb is in the present indicative. So we're following sequence of tenses. Pugno, I fight so strongly, so bravely, that I win the battle, right? This is the result. I fight so strongly with the result that I win the battle. I fight so strongly so that I win the battle. You can see that result clauses, we don't really translate with that may, might idea. It's really the result. So that's how we're going to translate it. That's why I'm fighting so strongly or so bravely, so that I may win the battle. And you can translate it with the may, or you can translate it without. Right? In the imperfect, here we've got the same sentence, but we'll have an imperfect subjunctive instead. I was fighting so bravely so that I might win the battle. I was fighting so bravely so that I win the battle. I was fighting so bravely with the result that I would win the battle. Okay? So you can see this is not the purpose of the fighting, right? This is the result. I was fighting so bravely with the result that I may win the battle. That's going to be the outcome, the logical outcome. We can also make a sentence negative, right? Pugno tam fortiter. I fight in the present so bravely so that I don't die. Okay, right? Moriar, again, is a present subjunctive. Non tells us that this is a negative result. We could do it in the imperfect too, in secondary sequence. Here we'll have moriar, imperfect subjunctive of the same verb, morior. Pugnabam tam fortiter ut non morirer. I was fighting so bravely so that I wouldn't die, right? With that result. Or so that I didn't die. Okay? So these are result clauses. Result clauses show the result. They usually have this. Is there any time you could possibly have confusion? That is, if it's not confusing if we have a negative. Ne is always for purpose, and ut non is always for result. But what if we just have the ut? Could we have a situation where we're not sure if we have a purpose clause or a result clause? Yes, we can. And sometimes there are cases where you just sort of argue about it. And sometimes there are cases where context would tell you, but if you're just reading a sentence in your textbook, sure, it's entirely possible that you wouldn't know. Because result clauses often have that so word, but they don't have to have it. And so you can see in this sentence, if I took out the tam fortiter, right, ut pugno ut proelium vincam, I am fighting so that I win the battle. Am I fighting so that with the result that I actually win the battle? Or am I fighting in order to win the battle? And in some cases, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference. Both of these clauses can be translated so that, and sometimes that's just your best alternative, okay? Context will usually help you figure out whether something is the purpose of an action or the result of an action, but it can be tricky. So finally, to sum up, we use sequence of tenses when we have subjunctive verbs in dependent clauses. Purpose clauses and result clauses both only use the tense of the subjunctive that is going to talk about action that comes after, right? The result of something or the purpose for something. So we're only ever going to use the present or the imperfect subjunctive following sequence of tenses. The purpose clause uses ut or ne to show the intention of an action, and we can translate it with so that, or in order to, or in order that, or sometimes just to. Result clauses we usually translate so that, or with the result that. And they follow ut or ut non in the negative, with, again, following sequence of tenses where we have the present or the imperfect. Can a purpose and result clauses be confusing? Sure, sometimes, but often it'll be really clear, and especially if you have that word like tam, ita, adeo, sic, tantos, totienes, tot, that is going to be a tip-off that you almost definitely for sure have a result clause. So send me your 3 questions, or up to 3 questions, so that we can talk about problems that you might have with this concept, and we'll do lots of practice in the next few days.